You're killing your kid?
Officer,
He's dead? Why?
I shot at him, bro. I didn't
You
know.
shot at him?
I didn't know there was a fucking kid in the back. And I killed him.
Roll medical.
I fucking
Can't know you. Hang on.
We were road raging. He came up around the side, like on the merge, you know, where the... What's the one that takes you northbound, eastbound over there?
Where's he going at right now?
It's in the car, on the passenger side. It's on the
Come over here. Have a seat here. I gotta figure out.
It was supposed to be the safest part of the day. A quiet morning drive. A father taking his 11-year-old son to school. The same routine they had repeated countless times. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Just a simple ride down a Las Vegas freeway. Moments before everything changed. Traffic was moving, the sky was clear, and the boy in the back seat was thinking about the day ahead. His backpack, his schoolwork, his morning thoughts, all untouched by what was about to happen. Then, on the road behind them, another driver began closing in. Two vehicles, side by side, for only a few seconds. A glare through the window. A hand gripping a steering wheel a little too tight. A moment of anger that should have faded away, but didn't. In the space of a heartbeat, the situation shifted. One of the drivers lifted a gun. A weapon aimed from one moving car into another. And before anyone could react, the sound that would cut a family's life in half echoed across the freeway. A single shot. Glass exploding, a father screaming his son's name, and an 11-year-old boy suddenly silent in the back seat. Minutes later, body camera video would capture a father collapsing onto the pavement, calling out a sentence no parent should ever speak. "My kid is dead." And miles away, the man accused of pulling the trigger was already telling officers, "I shot at him. I didn't know there was a kid in the car." This is the story of a morning routine shattered in seconds. A road rage moment that turned into a tragedy, and the confession that stunned even the responding officers. Before the freeway, before the gunshot, before the heartbreak captured on police body cameras, there was just a boy getting ready for school. 11-year-old Brandon Dominguez woke up in his home like he always did. His stepfather, Valente Ayala, moved through the morning routine, making sure Brandon had his backpack, his lunch, and everything he needed for the day. Nothing felt unusual. No tension. No warning signs. The sun was barely rising over Las Vegas, casting a warm glow through the windows as Brandon tied his shoes. He had plans that day, small plans, the kind every child thinks about. A lesson he was excited for. A friend he hoped to see. Simple things that should have filled the hours ahead. Ayala watched him walk to the car, the way any parent does, not knowing it would be the last time he'd ever see that small, familiar movement. Brandon climbed into the back seat, buckled himself in, maybe looked out the window at the quiet street outside. Ayala started the engine. Another ordinary day. Another morning drive. They pulled away from the house, heading toward the school they had driven to so many times before. The radio played softly. Traffic was steady. Everything felt routine. The kind of routine people never imagined could end in disaster. If anyone on that street had looked at the passing vehicle, they would have seen a father taking his child to class. Nothing more. Nothing less. What no one knew was that as they made their way toward the Interstate 215 Beltway, a second vehicle was also beginning its path toward the same stretch of road. And the driver inside that car would soon cross their path in a way that would change everything forever. As Brandon and his stepfather moved closer to the freeway, another vehicle was already making its way through the morning traffic. A white sedan, driven by 22-year-old Tyler Johns. Johns had no connection to the Dominguez family. No history with them. No reason to know their names, their faces, or their lives. But fate placed him on the same road, at the same moment, heading in the same direction. Investigators would later piece together his morning. Johns got into his car, started his routine, and joined the stream of traffic like thousands of others heading across Las Vegas. People passing him had no idea he was carrying a handgun inside the vehicle. They didn't know he was the kind of driver who could let a moment of frustration turn into something irreversible. As he approached the I-215 West, the pace of traffic shifted. Cars merged, lanes tightened, and drivers began making quick choices, the kind everyone makes during a morning commute. But for Johns, each of those tiny decisions from the cars around him started to feel like challenges, like personal tests, like moments he needed to win. He accelerated, then slowed, changed lanes, then changed back. Eyewitnesses described him as jockeying through traffic, moving aggressively between cars. He didn't know the vehicle ahead of him carried an 11-year-old boy. He didn't know a family's entire world was sitting just a few feet in front of his bumper. In fact, the only thing on his mind was the car in front of him. The driver he felt was in his way, and the anger rising inside him with every shift in traffic. Two vehicles, two ordinary mornings, now heading straight for each other on a stretch of freeway where seconds decide everything. Brandon and his stepfather merged onto the I-215, settling into the flow of traffic. Cars moved steadily, each driver focused on reaching their destination. Nothing seemed unusual until the white sedan appeared in the lane beside them. This was the moment investigators believe everything began to shift. Witnesses later described what happened as a series of quick, tense movements. Ayala's vehicle changing lanes. John's accelerating. Ayala adjusting again to avoid congestion. John's pulling up alongside him. No words exchanged. No windows rolled down. Just glances between two drivers navigating a busy freeway, each interpreting the other's actions in their own way. Inside Ayala's car, Brandon sat quietly in the back seat, unaware of any tension. Unaware that the car beside them contained a driver whose frustration was rising with every second. Unaware that his life was now caught between two adults making split-second decisions. As the vehicles approached the Gibson Road exit, the lane narrowed. Johns edged closer. Ayala attempted to merge. Neither driver wanted to give space. A simple moment that should have ended with nothing more than a sigh or a shake of the head suddenly carried far more weight. Dashcam footage from other vehicles shows the two cars moving tightly beside each other. Quick lane shifts, sudden braking, accelerating, falling back, then pulling forward again. The kind of road interaction millions experience every day without consequence. But this time, something inside John snapped. Something pushed him past the point of letting it go. He reached toward the passenger seat. His hand closed around a handgun. The weight of the weapon filled his palm as the white sedan inched closer to the Dominguez vehicle. Ayala kept driving, unaware. Brandon looked ahead, unaware. And in the space of a few heartbeats, Johns made a decision that would change their lives forever. The two vehicles moved side by side, only a few feet separating them. Other drivers continued their commute, unaware that one of the cars held a loaded gun pointed in their direction. What happened next lasted less than a second, but its impact will last a lifetime. Investigators say Johns shifted his grip on the wheel, lowered his window slightly, and raised the handgun toward the Dominguez vehicle. There was no warning, no horn, no attempt to de-escalate, just a sudden, irreversible act. A single shot rang out. The sound cut through the air, sharp and violent, echoing across the freeway. Drivers flinched. Some slammed their brakes. Others looked around, searching for where the noise came from. Inside Ayala's car, the rear window exploded, a blast of shattered glass shooting forward like tiny fragments of ice. Ayala jerked the wheel in panic, trying to keep the car under control. He called his son's name. No answer. He called again. Silence. Brandon had slumped over in the back seat, the force of the bullet stealing the breath from his body before he could even understand what was happening. Ayala pulled to the side of the freeway, brakes screeching as he fought against shock and confusion. He threw open the door, ran to the back seat, and saw what no parent should ever see. His son motionless, his voice gone, his life ending in the very seat where he should have been safest. Ayala screamed for help. He screamed his son's name. He screamed for someone, anyone, to stop. But Brandon did not move. What began as a normal morning drive had turned into a nightmare in less than a breath. The first emergency calls hit the dispatch center within seconds. Reports of a child shot on the freeway. A vehicle pulled over on the shoulder. A father screaming for help. Patrol units raced toward the location, weaving through morning traffic with lights cutting through the early sunlight. Their radios filled with updates. Child unresponsive. Possible gunshot wound. Shooter fled westbound. When the first officer arrived, the scene was raw and chaotic. The patrol car rolled to a stop behind Ayala's vehicle, its back window blown out, the glass scattered across the pavement like frost. The officer stepped out, body camera recording every second. Before he could even reach the car, he heard it. A scream so full of pain it barely sounded human. "My kid is dead. My kid is dead." Ayala was on his knees beside the open back door, hands shaking, trying desperately to wake Brandon. His voice broke with every word, echoing against the concrete walls of the freeway. The officer rushed forward. He looked into the back seat and froze. Brandon lay still, surrounded by shattered glass. His small frame motionless. The life that filled him every morning gone. The officer radioed for medical support, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. Even through the layers of training, experience, and professionalism, the reality hit him immediately. He placed his hand on Ayala's shoulder. Ayala pulled away, running his hands through his hair, pacing in circles, then collapsing again beside his son. Please, please, somebody help my boy. More officers arrived. Each one saw the same heartbreaking sight, a father crushed under the weight of a moment he could never take back. Paramedics approached the car and began their assessments. But within seconds, they exchanged a silent glance, the kind that says everything without a single word. There was nothing they could do. Ayala fell forward, his hands hitting the asphalt. His cries filled the air. The body camera captured every moment. The disbelief, the shock, the sheer heartbreak of a father losing his child on an ordinary weekday morning. The freeway kept moving around them. Life kept going. But for this family, time had stopped. While officers surrounded the crime scene, another part of the city began shifting into motion. Dispatchers relayed critical details across every available channel. A white sedan, a suspect possibly armed, last seen heading westbound on the I-215. Patrol units scattered across the freeway system, watching every exit, scanning every merging lane. Helicopters were notified. Nearby agencies were alerted. The shooter had vanished into the morning traffic, but the city had already begun tightening around him. Officers described the radio chatter as urgent, clipped, and heavy. Child shot. Shooter still outstanding. Vehicle last observed near Gibson Road. Detectives from the Homicide Division left their desks and rushed toward the freeway. Traffic cameras were pulled. Witness calls poured in from drivers who saw flashes of movement, sudden lane changes, and the moment the rear window shattered on the Dominguez vehicle. Some drivers said they heard the sound, but didn't understand it. Others thought a tire had blown. But when they realized the severity of what happened, they called in, creating a trail of information that helped map the suspect's possible route. Officers pieced the reports together like fragments of a puzzle. One driver saw the white sedan speed past the exit. Another claimed he noticed the driver look back in his mirror before accelerating. Each detail narrowed down the search area. Within minutes, a patrol unit spotted a vehicle matching the description parked near an apartment complex off the freeway. Engine off. Driver still inside. It was the break investigators needed, the first moment where the chaos of the freeway began forming a clear picture. A picture of a young man who had no idea what was following him, or how quickly officers were closing in. As patrol cars surrounded the parking area, the suspect finally stepped out of his vehicle. And what he said next, before anyone even demanded an explanation, would shock the officers who approached him. The officers approached quietly, weapons lowered but ready. They had no idea what kind of confrontation they were walking into. A suspect who might flee, resist, deny everything, or something else entirely. But as they stepped closer to the white sedan, the driver pushed his door open and raised his hands halfway, not in panic, but almost in resignation. It was 22-year-old Tyler Johns. He didn't wait to be questioned. He didn't demand a lawyer. He didn't attempt to create a story. The first words leaving his mouth were words the officers didn't expect to hear. I shot at him. The officer paused mid-step. Johns continued speaking, his voice low but clear. I shot at him. I didn't know there was a kid in the back. He repeated the statement as if trying to convince himself of it, as if the sentence would somehow soften the weight of what had already happened. The officers moved in slowly, securing his hands behind his back. Johns didn't resist. He didn't pull away. Instead, he kept talking, almost in a daze. It's my fault. It's 100% my fault. I got angry. I shot at him. I didn't know. I didn't know there was a kid in the car. His words flowed out like a confession he couldn't stop. He didn't try to blame the other driver. He didn't try to shift the responsibility. He simply repeated the same truth, over and over again, as officers guided him toward the patrol car. One officer would later reflect on that moment, describing how surreal it felt to hear the suspect admit everything before they even read him his rights. A confession delivered, not under pressure, but in the overwhelming silence that follows a catastrophic decision. While the city reeled from the tragedy, the man accused of pulling the trigger stood on a quiet sidewalk, telling police exactly what he had done. A moment that would become a central piece of evidence in the case against him. With John's confession hanging in the air, officers moved methodically, following protocol even as the shock of his words lingered between them. They searched him, secured him, and positioned him beside the patrol car. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the officers, but from the reality of what he had just acknowledged. One officer asked where the weapon was. Johns nodded toward the interior of his vehicle. "It's inside," he said softly. "On the seat." The officers opened the door of the white sedan with care, unsure of what else they might find. There it was, the handgun resting exactly where he said it would be. No attempt to hide it, no attempt to discard it. They photographed the weapon, logged it, and placed it into evidence. The same object that moments earlier had ended an innocent child's life now lay inside a sealed bag, its role in the tragedy preserved for court. Standing by the patrol car, John spoke again, almost under his breath, but clear enough for officers to hear. "I shouldn't have done it. I was just mad. I didn't think." There was no answer any officer could give. No words that could undo the damage. So they continued their work in silence, letting procedure guide them through the weight of the moment. As Johns was placed in the back of the patrol car, he looked out through the window at the officers gathering around. For a brief moment, he seemed to realize the full scope of what had happened. His anger, his decision, the shot, the life lost, and the consequences closing in around him. The door to the patrol car shut, the lock engaging with a heavy click. That sound marked the beginning of the legal path ahead. A path that would take him from a parking lot to a courtroom, from a moment of rage to a charge that could define the rest of his life. Officers notified dispatch. Suspect detained. Weapon recovered. Send homicide. The arrest was complete. But the story was far from over. After the arrest, the case moved swiftly through the hands of investigators and into the office of the Clark County District Attorney. The evidence was already overwhelming. A shattered rear window, an 11-year-old child killed instantly, and a suspect who confessed moments after officers arrived. Within hours, prosecutors announced the first major step. Tyler Johns would be charged with murder. They reviewed the body cam footage. They listened to Johns repeat his words. "I shot at him. I didn't know there was a kid in the back. I'm responsible." But while his confession acknowledged the act, prosecutors focused on something deeper. The choices leading up to that moment. According to their statement, the shooting did not happen by accident. It did not come from a misfire or a moment of clumsy handling. They argued that Johns followed the vehicle, positioned himself beside it, aimed deliberately, and fired with intent. In their view, those steps reflected a clear decision, not a mistake. A decision that turned a simple driving dispute into a deadly encounter. At the court hearing, Johns appeared before the judge wearing a jail-issued uniform, his head lowered. Family members of Brandon Dominguez sat in the courtroom, silent but visibly shaken as prosecutors laid out the early facts of the case. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the seriousness of the charge, and delivered a ruling that carried its own weight. No bail. The courtroom fell quiet. Johns would remain behind bars while awaiting trial, a consequence of the severity of the allegations and the irreversible harm done. As deputies led him out of the courtroom, the reality of what awaited him became clear. A murder prosecution, a grieving family, a community demanding justice, and a legal process that was only just beginning. When the last patrol car pulled away from the freeway shoulder that morning, the world around Brandon Dominguez continued as if nothing had happened. Traffic flowed. Workers hurried to their jobs. Children arrived at school. But for one family, time had stopped in its tracks. News of the shooting spread quickly across Las Vegas. Radio stations interrupted their normal broadcasts. Local reporters arrived at the scene with cameras rolling, and within hours, the photo of an 11-year-old boy, smiling, full of life, was being shared across millions of screens. At home, Brandon's family struggled to understand the unimaginable. His room remained untouched, schoolbooks neatly stacked, toys placed where he last left them, his backpack still leaning against the wall, waiting for a day he would never see. Every corner of the house carried memories that now felt like open wounds. For his stepfather, Valente Ayala, the moments replayed endlessly. The sound of the gunshot, the shattering glass, the desperate screams for help. He returned to the spot on the freeway days later, standing in silence as cars rushed past, each of them unaware of the life lost where he now stood. He placed flowers beside the guardrail, and then he simply stared at the pavement, as though he was begging time to go backward. Brandon's mother faced a different kind of pain, the ache of knowing her son left home that morning expecting to return. She looked at his drawings pinned on the refrigerator, his clothes still folded in drawers, his favorite sneakers resting by the door. These small, ordinary items suddenly became unbearable reminders of everything stolen from her. At Brandon's school, the principal gathered the students. Teachers spoke softly, choosing their words carefully as they explained that their classmate, their friend, would not be returning. Some children cried openly. Others sat quietly, trying to make sense of something far bigger than their young minds could process. An empty desk sat in his classroom untouched. Students placed letters on it, notes written in shaky handwriting, drawings of hearts, messages saying how much they would miss him. A teacher placed a photograph of Brandon on the desk, surrounded by flowers collected from the school garden. Outside the school, parents held their children a little closer that afternoon. Some lingered longer at pickup, their eyes filled with sadness and fear. Many whispered the same question: how could something like this happen? In the community, the conversation deepened. Local leaders, law enforcement officials, and neighbors gathered at town meetings, speaking about anger on the roads, the responsibilities of carrying a weapon, and the fragile line between frustration and violence. What happened to Brandon was not just a tragic event. It was a reminder that the smallest decision behind the wheel can become catastrophic. Reporters stood outside the courthouse as the case moved forward, providing updates to a city that remained shaken. Images from the bodycam footage, the father collapsing, the child lying still, became etched into public memory. People who had never met Brandon felt a connection to him, a sorrow for a child who lost his future to a moment of rage. As days turned into weeks, the pain did not fade. Brandon's absence followed his family everywhere. During holidays, during quiet evenings at home, during moments when they expected to hear his footsteps or his laughter echo down the hallway. Every photograph became a reminder of time frozen. Every memory became a question of what he could have become. And in court filings, statements, and community gatherings, one truth echoed again and again. This wasn't just a traffic dispute, not just an argument on the road. It was the loss of a life, a young boy who had dreams, potential, and a family who loved him deeply. As the legal system moved forward, the community stood with the Dominguez family. Candles lit the night during vigils. Voices shared prayers, stories, and promises to never forget Brandon's name. And through all the grief, all the anger, and all the unanswered questions, one message remained painfully clear. Anger on the road can take far more than a moment. It can take a life. For Brandon Dominguez, the story ended on the freeway that morning. But for those left behind, the story continues every day. In memories, in tears, in the quiet places where his name is still spoken with love and sorrow. If you found this story important, and you want more cases told with care, depth, and full context, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.